When my boss told me to let it go, it wasn't advice. It was a warning. A clear signal that my questions were becoming inconvenient, that rocking the boat was not part of the company culture. So I stopped asking questions out loud, and I started documenting. It all began with something small, almost trivial. A task was suddenly reassigned from my plate to someone else's. Week no notice. Then a critical deadline was moved up, again, with no explanation. A decision was made that directly contradicted a well-established company policy. I brought it up calmly. I wasn't emotional. I wasn't being aggressive. It was just a simple, professional question. And that's when my boss looked at me and said it. Let it go. It's not a big deal. But in that moment, I didn't hear reassurance. I heard dismissal. Plain and simple. Let it go didn't mean the issue was resolved, or that my concern was invalid. It meant they didn't want the issue examined at all. It was a clear message. Stop digging, and that told me everything I needed to know about the environment I was working in. You see, I wasn't in senior leadership. I wasn't a C-suite executive making the big calls. But my role was unique. I was positioned right in the middle of everything. A central hub connecting different departments. I worked closely with operations, ensuring things ran smoothly. I collaborated with compliance, making sure we followed the rules. And I was involved in reporting, which meant I saw the final numbers and outcomes. This unique vantage point meant that when something didn't quite line up, I was often the first one to notice. And when things quietly went wrong, the fallout frequently landed right on my desk. After that first dismissal, the let-it-go moments started happening more and more often. It became a pattern. Policies were being bent, just temporarily. Of course, approvals were implied in conversations, but never put in writing. Instructions would mysteriously change, depending on who was asking and who was listening. It was like the rules were written in disappearing ink. And every single time I raised a concern, every time I pointed out an inconsistency, I was met with the same dismissive phrase, "Let it go." It was their go-to shutdown line, so I did. I let it go. At least, that's what I did out loud. Quietly, behind the scenes, I opened a new folder on my computer. Nothing dramatic, no fancy title like Evidence Locker or anything like that. It was just a simple, discrete folder. And in it, I started saving everything. Emails that contained questionable instructions, meeting notes where verbal agreements were made but never formalized. I saved links to the official policy references that were being ignored. I even started taking date-stamped screenshots of conversations and system changes. I never announced what I was doing. I didn't threaten anyone or wave my folder around like a weapon. I just kept my head down and meticulously kept my records. I shifted my entire approach. I stopped correcting people in real time during meetings. I stopped being the person who would jump in and say, "Actually, the policy says this." Instead, I started following instructions to the letter, exactly as they were given. If a directive came down that I knew contradicted company policy, I would simply ask for that instruction in writing. A quick email saying, "Just to confirm, you'd like me to proceed with X, even though policy Y states Z. Please let me know if I've misunderstood." If a request felt particularly risky or ambiguous, I would summarize it back to them in an email, not to accuse them of anything. Just to confirm. My new favorite phrase became, "Just making sure we're all aligned." It took a little while, but eventually, my boss started to notice the change. The questions started coming. "Why do you need this in an email? Do we really need to document this part of the process?" My answer was always the same, delivered with a calm and professional tone, just making sure we realigned, and that I have a clear understanding of the task. And that's when the discomfort really started to set in for them, because I had stopped silently fixing things in the background. The issues that were always bubbling under the surface became visible to everyone. The reports I submitted started flagging major inconsistencies, because I was no longer massaging the data to make it fit. Key processes started stalling because they were waiting for the proper written approvals that were never given. My documented questions started reaching other departments that had previously been kept in the dark. Suddenly, senior leadership started asking questions. Why is this project delayed? Why is this report showing a discrepancy? Why is this happening now? The answer was beautifully simple. It had always been happening. The only difference was that now it was impossible to ignore. The silent, invisible patchwork I used to do was gone, and the structural flaws were exposed for all to see. Eventually, the inevitable happened. I was called into a meeting. It was me, my boss, someone from HR, and a director from another department. The official goal of the meeting, according to the calendar invite, was to reset expectations. My boss went first. They explained how I was overthinking things, creating unnecessary friction, and not being a flexible team player. I was painted as the problem, the person who was gumming up the works with bureaucracy. I listened patiently until they were finished. Then, the representative from HR turned to me and asked the question that changed everything. Can you give us a specific example of what you're concerned about? I didn't argue. I didn't get defensive. I didn't raise my voice. I simply opened my laptop, navigated to my quiet little folder, and opened a file. I showed them the original email request. Then I pulled up the official company policy it directly contradicted. Then I showed them the email thread where my boss had explicitly told me to let it go. And finally, I showed them my follow-up email confirming their decision, which they had acknowledged. I offered no commentary. I let the documents speak for themselves. The timeline was clear, logical, and undeniable. The room went silent. No one interrupted. No one tried to defend the initial explanation. HR asked a few clarifying questions, which I answered by showing them more documentation. My boss stopped speaking entirely. In the weeks that followed, things began to change. Several internal processes were formally reviewed and updated. The requirements for written approvals were clarified and reinforced across the company. Certain temporary practices that had become the norm were quietly ended. No apology was ever issued to me. There was no grand moment of vindication. But something much more important changed. I was never told to let it go again. So, if you're ever in a situation where someone at work tells you to let it go, pay very close attention. Sometimes, what they're really saying is, we don't want to be held accountable. We don't want a paper trail of this decision. We don't want to face the consequences of our actions. So, I let it go, out loud, and I wrote it all down instead. Because documentation doesn't argue. It doesn't get emotional. It just waits. Thanks for watching. If you've ever faced a situation like this, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And for more real workplace stories where staying professional is the ultimate power move, be sure to subscribe to Desk Job Justice. We'll see you in the next one.